Hello, everybody. Good morning, which is a weird term for us to say on a podcast.
Yes, indeed.
And welcome to the Besides and On podcast. My name is Scuba. We have Monk on the other side of the table.
I am knackered.
I could just imagine you have.
We got hit by an alarm,
Yeah.
so I had to run to the other side of the house. And I'm not unfit. We just have a very, very big house. We live in a mansion, and that's my excuse for being out of breath.
Talking of fitness, on the line right now we have Gary Fahey. How are you doing, Gary?
Yeah, well, thanks, gents. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. We like to do stupid segues before we start the podcast, so I apologise for that, Gary. It's just the way we do things. Just the way we do things over here. So we have Gary on because he has an interesting backstory and sort of a great story from. Yeah, actually, what we'll do is we'll get you to introduce yourself, Gary, to start off with, and we'll get into that. It's a great start, yeah.
No dramas, gents. As I said, thanks for having me on. It's good morning to everybody there. It's a good evening down here in Australia, and a little bit of a background. I'm 44 now. Been getting along in life. I'm a pretty standard bloke down here in Australia. Grew up in Western Sydney with a good family. Typical Australian sort of family. Love my sports, rugby league in particular. But all sorts of sports from all over the world. Spent a very normal schooling life before I started a career. First of all, as a high school PE teacher, physical education teacher, and soon after that, 99, I joined the Australian Federal Police. I spent 18 and a half years there. For me, they were all good. However, there's as I'm sure we'll get into, there's bits and pieces that have created who I am today. So it was, it was a very enjoyable and fantastic experience for me. It took me all over the world. It got me to meet some fantastic people, some great exposure, some exciting stuff. Some days, some long days sitting in cars, but most of the days were very exciting. I enjoyed that career. That took me to around about 40, and not long before there, I wasn't doing too well in my own headspace. I was making a lot of silly decisions, making a lot of bad decisions, taking a lot of bad actions. I ended up with a quite severe bout of depression, which also included a very significant gambling addiction, and ultimately that cost me quite a bit of money, my career, my reputation, and my family. So it was a very long ride from the penthouse to the shit house, as they say. And fortunately enough, I've been able to use that experience, I suppose, to take the last 4 years to look deeper into where addiction comes from, where that habit and routine formed from, where the depression comes from, and I've now moved on to helping guys like me who are seemingly had it all, had the success, had the job, the money, the family, the house, the car, and still wasn't quite right inside. And hopefully I can get to a lot of guys before they get to where I was.
Mm-hmm. It's a great story anyway for the. So I would like to start off with what were you like growing up, and like what was the area like that you grew up in?
Yeah, look, the area I grew up in first of all in Australia is a place called Mount Druitt. Strangely enough, probably about 10 years ago, there was a documentary series done out there by the name of Struggle Street. I did used to joke that I'm probably the only person from Mount Druitt that ended up in the police, and all the rest of the people there ended up on the other side. It's clearly a joke, and obviously that almost come back to haunt me some 30 years later. But Western Sydney, it was very working class where I grew up. My dad worked 2 jobs for 20 years. Very grateful for that. My mum worked as well. They worked very hard for us to get out of that area. It was a nice place when we were there, but very, very low socioeconomic and working class. Football, beer, that sort of stuff was our football, rugby league. Was probably the talk of the town out that way. Still probably is. But I was a relatively normal kid. I did love sports. I loved my mates. If we weren't riding our push bikes, we were playing cricket, we were playing rugby league, we were playing soccer, swimming in the pool, all that sort of stuff. As a young fella, pretty active, not too bad at school, and didn't really get in too much trouble as a young fella.
Mm-hmm. That was my next question. Did you get into any sort of craziness when you were younger? But no.
No, not anything that would be outlandish. I certainly wasn't into anything bad. We did things that what we considered most young kids did. We had a few drinks underage. We got into a few fights with a few people. We stayed out late and that sort of stuff. But certainly nothing that would make a highlights reel of getting in trouble.
Yeah. So your next point would have been sort of like after high school, I'd imagine, would be your next sort of highlight. What were you doing like after high school and stuff? Like,
was it planned to be a PE teacher, or was that just something you fell into?
Yeah, it's an interesting story, that actually. I was probably about 14 or 15. I came across the federal police as a career. We got the two distinctions here in Australia. We have the federal police, and each of the states have their own police force that basically rule different jurisdictions, different laws, and those types of things. But I came across the federal police, and I was very intrigued by that. I got a bit excited by the possibility of doing detective style work, I suppose, and that it appeared as though some of their cases were, a lot bigger, large drug importations and that sort of stuff. And one of the criteria was to go to university, and so I ended up doing health science at uni, health science and education, and becoming a PE teacher. It was another career choice I would have been very happy to continue with. I was teaching for about 6 months, and my mum gave me a call and said, "Remember when you wanted to be in the federal police? They've just advertised and it closes in 4 days, or they've advertised and it closes in 4 days." So we rushed home and filled out the application. That was the end of 1998, and by the middle of 1999, after multiple, going through multiple stages, I was one of 73 people on class 2 of 99.
Awesome.
So what I'm trying to gauge the difference between the state police and the federal police just based on our system. So we have like...
Yeah, sure. I presume I've spent a bit of time in England. I presume probably the closest I could compare it to would be Scotland Yard versus. I spent a year up in Yorkshire, so it'd be Scotland Yard versus the Yorkshire Police.
Okay, right. That makes sense.
Different provinces and sort of thing.
Yeah,
and it's a little different. Most people try to liken it to the US system of FBI versus their state police, but in Australia we typically have very clear delineations of responsibility. It's not that they just manage different legislation. State police typically would involve themselves around more localised cases, murders, robberies and those types of things. The federal police in Australia typically have jurisdiction over anything that has to do with the border or national interest.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to compare it to CID, which is what we would consider like the serious crimes, but it seems to be a different thing.
And look, we have those divisions, but it really is a difference between whether it's of national interest or more localised.
Right, okay.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the fitness angle would have helped you a lot. Again, as we know, in policing comes a lot of running, trying to chase the bad guy. So it would have helped a lot, I'm assuming, in your job there.
Well, I was very fortunate. For some strange reason, the year that I joined, they actually removed the fitness requirement for joining the police. I was okay at the time. I was playing football and was relatively fit, and they did subsequently bring it back. And for I'm sure as we'll get into my roles in close protection, we certainly had to pass fitness tests. But it was health and fitness is something that I've always been involved in or enjoyed, and it doesn't seem a natural synergy, but there certainly are synergies probably between teaching and the police force, and also fitness.
I've always been confused by American TV. The fact that they always sort of force in some unfit police officer in some way.
That's just what I was about to ask.
Aye, I'm always just sort of like, how did they pass the fitness test?
But again, there seems to be like not really like a huge requirement for like the police to be fit, and it's like sort of making them inclusive. But I feel like you should be fit.
That's one of the jobs. It's like joining the army and being unable to run about. Like it doesn't seem like it would work very well.
Like being in the army and unable to handle a gun. Like they just kind of
we've certainly got our fair share of unfit ones here. I think for a lot of times maybe the fitness test is at the start of someone's career and it doesn't necessarily continue throughout. And as controversial as it might be, my view has always been you should be fit for the job. I don't care what that fitness standard is, but if the job requires you to drag a 100-kilo person out of a building, then you should be able to drag a 100-kilo person out of a building, regardless of whether you're 20 years of age, 50 years of age, or anything else.
Exactly, because like firemen sort of have the same thing. Firemen have to be like fighting fit and ready to
if you're a fireman, it's not going to work. But
that's true. I mean, I suppose the difference, maybe these days too, the modern police force has far more wide-ranging jobs as well, especially with the inclusion of IT crime, computer tech crime. Chasing bad guys isn't necessarily something that's physical all of the time. There's certainly physical roles there, but probably in more modern policing, you'd be seeing a lot more. A lot of people that are adept at different skills, suitable to the role.
I had a stupid image in my head there of a cyber police guy typing really quickly to catch the bad guy. Absolutely stupid.
They'd certainly do a better job than I would.
So, what was your next point of focus? How long were you in the police?
Yeah, look, I was in the police for 18 and a half years. So, I mean, I've only been out about 4 years, I suppose. And, look, I did a lot of different things. One thing I always used to say to people about the federal police, or probably any police, if you didn't like your job, you didn't have to leave to change. There's areas of forensics these days. There's IT crime. There is drug crime. If you're in the state police, there's homicide. There's a whole range of different things that you can do. But if you're an electrician and you don't like being an electrician, you've got to go back and train again. So I was very fortunate over 18 years to be able to do things that I enjoyed, and knowing that if I didn't enjoy it, that you didn't have to wait too long and you could find a job somewhere else without actually having to leave your workplace. But I started like most people in what we would call investigations, and I was very junior, and but not long after I was out on in Sydney. My first posting was to Sydney, and I think I got out in October, and by February I was on a customs boat up and down the Pacific Ocean, searching for a drug importation. And I believe, I stand corrected, but I believe at the time it was Australia's biggest white powder seizure of 500 kilos. And to be fair, I did very little in that job, but it very soon after joining it opened up my eyes to how exciting or enjoyable, or what a difference the role could make. So I spent a couple of years in investigations, and I probably was a little fortunate in the time that I joined. A couple of areas that I wanted to work in were surveillance and close protection, and they were well sought after jobs, but around 99, 2000, there was a bit of a mass exodus from the federal police, just in terms of timing and age of people. And instead of waiting what most people would have considered 5 or 10 years to get into some of those roles, after about 2 years, I was doing surveillance, and probably about 4 years, I was in close protection. So I ticked off my 5-10 year goals in the first 4 years that I was there. So I was quite lucky, but they certainly opened my eyes up to the different types of things that we could do there.
Could we go back just a second? We spoke to a police sergeant a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And we got a lot of criticism from a lot of our friends for not getting answers from him. And we spoke to Police Scotland, and it was an official police policy that they weren't allowed to state personal opinions and things. But you're not in the police anymore, so you could state.
I certainly am not.
Yeah. The issue that I've always had is situations where the law says one thing and you disagree with the law. So, like, for an example, if I was in the police, I think cannabis should be legal for personal use, and it isn't legal in Scotland. And so, in a situation where I had to arrest someone for smoking weed and put them in jail, I would feel troubled by that. I would be unable to do that. Is that a situation that you've had to deal with, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, look, it's not a situation that I actually came across. To be fair, most of my 18 years wasn't in arresting people type of policing. Right. However, the nature of the work that we would do in the federal police, you're looking at drug importations, not typically marijuana. Okay. So things that I wouldn't have had too much conflict with. I do recall on my interview that I was asked if I came across two people fighting and one of them was my friend, what would I do? And my answer at the time, and I probably got a bit worried that wasn't going to let me get in, was my answer was, well, I'd probably just pull them apart and tell them both to go home. And they questioned me on it and said, why, are you going to let your friend off? And I said, well, no, it wouldn't really matter if it was a friend of mine or not. I mean, where I grew up, two blokes standing around having a fight is probably not worth my time unless they're hurting a whole bunch of other people, or, there's something a little bit more sinister to it. One of the great things about being a police officer in this country and certainly in the UK as well is the power of discretion. You have that to a point. So you can choose, I suppose, if with good reason to look on. But I suppose my answer to the specifics of that question is, I think that when you join the police, I took an oath. Some people take an affirmation depending on their beliefs, but it's not about, it becomes less about my personal beliefs and more about upholding what I believe is the institution of the country. So the institution of Australia. And if the institution of Australia determines that cannabis is not legal, then, if I feel strongly enough about that, I probably shouldn't be in the police force. And if I don't feel strongly enough to leave, then I probably should feel strong enough about my values to uphold the institution of the laws of the country. It didn't come up in my policing, but I could certainly see where it would be a personal versus professional dilemma that people have, and probably more so these days that things like cannabis are a topic of discussion.
Yeah, it must be awkward for US police being that you could be in one state and it's legal, and then you go into the next state and it's illegal. So if someone just happened to be meters across, they've not committed a crime, but because they weren't.
Yeah, look,
across.
I think I can't really speak for other police or other parts of the world, but I think. What you find is over time, police start to work out a system that works well for the community, works well for the police system. I mean, there are always news reports of clogged up justice systems and, perhaps taking somebody downtown for a couple of plants is not in the police officer or the community's best interest. And, that's why a lot of police officers are given that discretion of warnings or something else. And, it does happen here. It happens in, road crime, speeding, or things like that. There is that option, and I think we have to trust that there's always a bad egg here or there, but we have to trust that those that are in the role are going to do the right thing, by everybody.
See, I think that was a great answer, and I feel like the sergeant we interviewed could have said that.
Because it's not like...
he danced around the situation.
Yeah, and I'm never going to interview a policeman that is like active in the force ever again.
Yeah, because that seemed over the top.
God, how long were they? 45 minutes, and we just got it was just an array of nothing.
Yeah, and we were sitting in the police station. We had to travel down to the police station, so we're in an interrogation room trying to interview this guy.
Yeah, look, I think it really depends. Yeah, probably on the individual. Depends on where they are, what they've been through. Look, I probably would have answered that question the same the last 5 years of my career anyway. But I probably wouldn't have answered it that way the first 5 years. You know, you have a different. It depends on where you are in your career, what you want to do next, and potentially what your boss tells you can and can't do. You know, there is an element of discipline required in the police force, but I still think you'll find good opportunities to interview or for people that will talk within reason as well. You know, I mean, even my answer is still couched in understanding that people can take things out of context and to try and make sure that, you know, it's my beliefs, but it's also not going to harm anything that goes on as well.
Yeah. You said, I think you said there that you spent a bit of time in surveillance as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. I spent about 2 years in surveillance for an area that was under a national drug scheme in Australia. So there was a lot of money pumped into trying to prevent importation of drugs. I think it started on the back of a heroin influx in the 90s, and I did a couple of years in surveillance, which was fantastic. It was probably as close to TV policing as that I can recall.
That's exactly what I had in mind. Was a lot of sitting in a car, a couple of coffees with your friend or your partner.
That's where the fitness thing starts to.
That's where the fitness thing comes up. It's like, because I imagine, like, I don't know if you've seen The Wire, the American TV program.
Yeah.
Very similar or no?
Look, bits and pieces, and I think it depends on your day. I've had 8 hours staring at a door.
That's exactly.
But I've also had a 24-hour shift where it just couldn't end because things just kept happening and happening and happening, and you know, it's probably those moments that keep you going. But the one great thing I will say about surveillance is, and everybody I worked with are fantastic team members, and you end up creating your own, little dark humour, your own ways to look after each other and look out for each other, and quite often even those 8-hour days looking at a door aren't too hard when you've got a team with you, and I suppose you believe in what you're doing. But yeah, certainly those days where, you know, new people turn up that you've never seen before, and you know, you're driving all over town and trying to jump out of your car and not be seen, and you know, just blend in and back in your car and all that sort of stuff. It does get a little bit exciting, and you know, some days you also goes to the next level where you're responsible for the big takedown, the big arrest, where five cars screech up to a halt at one car, and everyone gets all excited and starts yelling and screaming for people to get on the ground. And it's probably once a year. There's a lot of 8-hour starings for that 40 seconds of action, but in a little way, it's kind of worth it.
I wanted to ask,
TV shows that they show the year of preparation.
No, they'll maybe show 2 minutes. Yeah, they'll show like someone taking a bite of a sandwich and then a sip of coffee, and they're like, oh, there he is, and then that's it. They tail the guy and it's done. But one thing,
like a shit TV show if they went through the whole thing,
but accurate. Just an 8-hour long TV show, or 24 hours, that would work.
Well, they done one of them.
Well, they did, yeah. One thing I wanted to ask there was, you mentioned a sort of like near enough 24-hour shift where you're sitting in the middle of a bit of a standoff. I wanted to ask about like clocking in and clocking out of being a policeman, because there's absolutely no way. Like, at what point do you decide, right, this is the end of my shift?
Fuck off, Steve. We're interviewing somebody who's been a professional for 18 years, and you're, how the fuck do you clock in?
I know.
Where's your timesheet?
I know. I like these questions.
What a fucking shitty question. I apologise, Gary.
No. That's it's fair enough. I'm happy for all questions. I gather you two don't clock in when you when you get to the other side of the table.
No.
Yeah, look, typically you've got a shift and a shift start time, and you'll have a shift finish time. But the nature of the work, especially with something like surveillance or even close protection, you're expecting a job to finish at 4:00 in the afternoon, but at 3:30 you see somebody with a suspicious bag, hand it to somebody else. Well, you're not going to go home. If you're in close protection and you're looking after the Prime Minister and a phone call comes in that there's a dinner on or there's another function to go to, you're not going to go home. And again, it comes down to that team thing. Within the rules and the laws of employment in this country, you're probably well within your rights to say, see you later, I'm going home. But that's not why any of us joined the job. If we wanted a 9-to-5 job, we would have taken one. And, sometimes it gets a little difficult. I remember sitting at the end of long shifts where, we've reflected back and you start to assess that you're probably behaving as if you were drunk, that, you're living on 4 hours sleep or less sometimes, and you're in the back of a 20-hour shift, and, you're still responsible for, the protection of the Prime Minister or some other, ambassador or protected person, or you're chasing down, drug dealers, drug importers, and you're responsible for firearms and all of that sort of stuff. It can get a little dangerous. We're very grateful that rarely does it go, in the worst possible way. But, a lot of that comes down to the guys' training. It comes down to the teamwork. It comes down to, recognising if your mates are struggling and maybe subbing them out when they need to. But, yeah, I haven't heard too many people, unless the wife's calling, that have said they've had to clock out early from policing.
Yeah, it was just to let people know that, I don't know, you're trying to save a baby, then it hits 6:00, your shift ends, you drop the baby, then you go home, sort of thing. That doesn't happen. As silly as it was, I wanted to ask a silly question.
It would be interesting to see, I don't know who's the Australian Prime Minister?
At the moment, it's Scott Morrison.
Right. So Scott Morrison's walking along, and you've got a bunch of people that are about to clock off, and then they just walk away.
Checking the time nervously on their watch.
And then Scott's just like, oh, shit.
Damn.
Well, there's nobody here now.
Well, the next shift workers, I would imagine, because you have to get there 15 minutes before your shift.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of planning. The Prime Minister's protection team isn't just 4 people. It's it's multiple people and multiple shifts, and most of the time it works out very well. Sometimes the Prime Minister will jump on a plane and go somewhere that there's no other team, or as has happened to me in surveillance, someone we were following got on the freeway and basically drove twice the distance from London to Edinburgh. And we were in the middle of a shift and we just kept going. It's a 10-hour drive, and you have to get to the other end and you figure it out once you get there.
So do you get paid for that? Do you get overtime in that, or is it a salary?
See, you thought I asked a silly question, and now you're deeply interested.
You got into it, so I'm like, well, fuck.
Look, the simple answer, the short answer is yes. In what form it comes can change depending on your job, depending on your responsibility, depending on the police force that you're in. It could be paid overtime. You might get a bonus in your salary anyway, or you might get time off for it as well.
Okay.
There are a lot of shifts that that you do have the opportunity to perhaps duck off a little early as well if you've done a couple of big ones, and they're typically pretty good at looking after the guys. It's a hard job, because it's especially. It's a largely male job. It's getting a bit better now, but we're all alpha personalities, and it's not a game, but it becomes a competition between you and the bad guy, and you don't want to go home. It's very hard. You'd almost do it for free because you get that competitive spirit and that drive to win, and that drives a lot of police. They're there doing the right thing, and it becomes the challenge that you want to overcome. So you very rarely have to encourage cops to stay out. You probably more have to push them to go home.
Not to play it down, but it becomes sort of a game when you're dealing with big crimes like that, because it's a case of I'm waiting for you to fuck up so that I can catch you. And a lot of the times,
Look, I think in its most basic form, there's a lot at stake, and I don't want to undermine the work, but it is a game. It's us versus them. It's me versus you. It's cops and robbers. It's a game. It's just for real stakes. That's all.
So and a lot of these people are like career criminals, so that they know the police are going to be watching them at some point.
Definitely,
yeah. No, it's look, you would come across guys that you had locked up before, or they know the system, or they know your, and they've got good networks as well. They have their own surveillance. They follow cops as much as cops follow them, and they're trying to do whatever they can to get away, and we're trying to do whatever we can to catch them. And in a I suppose a weird macabre sort of way, it's exciting. It's enjoyable. You want to be better than the criminal, and there's some confines because you have laws, and rightly so. We've got laws that we have to work within, and you've got to try and outsmart and outwit, and it's almost like a game of Survivor before Survivor existed. Outwit, outlast, outplay.
I have one last silly question before we move on.
There's no silly questions, mate, just silly people that ask them.
Yep, exactly, yep. Describes me to a T. For years we've heard like different stories of like psychics getting brought in to deal with different policing matters and stuff. Have you ever had to deal with that? Like some sort of crystal energy healer coming in to try and solve a crime for you? Like, have you ever had to deal with like logic against non-logic? No. Never at all?
No, it's not something I've heard of in Australia. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. Certainly the crimes that I was working on wouldn't have revolved around that. When I was doing surveillance, it was drug importation stuff. So, I can only say what I've seen in the movies, and I presume it's more where are the bodies buried type of stuff. I don't imagine it's a very big business in Australia, just knowing Australian culture. I'm not suggesting it's never happened. I've never heard of it happening, but I think it might be something that's a little more US. If it was going to happen, I presume it would happen more in the US.
Yeah. What is it about the US that seems to cater more to mentalists?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hate it. Because the reason I asked is because that would completely annoy me to death.
That would annoy me. Yeah, I think I'd tell them to fuck off.
Like a wee guy that comes in with 2 wires and it's like, I can find heroin.
Yeah.
He's just walking along with 2, just idiotic.
Yeah, I've been sitting here watching this fucking warehouse for 14 days. And you're going to come in and tell me that you're fucking aura searching. Fuck off.
You come in with 2 car aerials and you think you could find the fucking heroin. Idiot.
That's true, but I suppose if, as a good police officer will never close down any possibility.
That's why I'm a shit police officer.
I would.
although I'd be pissed off if somebody brought it in.
Definitely.
So let's go on to the Prime Minister protection.
Yeah, well, I'll let you start.
Thing. Sure.
How did that start? I don't know. I don't actually know how to ask that question.
Does he put in a bid to the police to get it started? How does that work?
Is it like the Secret Service? Is it like a separate thing as well as police protection?
Yeah. So I suppose the easiest way for me to describe it is the way that the policing system is set up in Australia is definitely different to the US, and most people around the world would be familiar with the US model from TV shows and that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. The US model typically has police services attached to multiple different areas. Transport. The Secret Service is mostly to do with finance, but also responsible for the president. They have State Department police. They have all different types of police. In Australia, in particular, the federal police more cover probably a range of those all in one. We're certainly not as big a country. There's 25 million people here versus 300 odd million in the US. We don't have a policing culture like they do in the US. So our federal police here would have elements of them that are similar to the FBI. we have elements of it that's similar to the State Department, elements that are similar to the Secret Service. So part of the responsibility of the Australian Federal Police is the protection of Australian high office holders that are deemed to require protection. And one of those is always, as long as I've known, has always been the Australian Prime Minister. There's a reasonably famous story about a Prime Minister in, I think, 1918 being egged and being hit with an egg, and the state police wouldn't look after him. Probably back to your cannabis question before, not that cannabis had anything to do with it, but the state police didn't agree with the things the Prime Minister was doing, so when he got egged, they didn't really look after him very well. And soon after that, the federal police existed and assisted with the looking after the Prime Minister. I'm pretty sure I got my history right there, but I might be off a little bit, but that's primarily where it started from. And ever since then, the federal police have been responsible for that, the protection of the Prime Minister. And we've got Governor General here, who's the Queen's representative in Australia, usually gets a form of protection as well. We do protection on, foreign visitors. If Boris Johnson was to come, we would be involved in that type of thing. So that business typically did skyrocket after September 11. Wasn't many people getting looked after, and then September 11 happened. September 11 in the Twin Towers coming down, and protection went through the roof. We were protecting everybody, and so therefore I got into protection. I was just looking after a local, actually a UK consul general is where I started, and just over a number of years, you keep building your skills and your networks, and it's almost like a job interview or application. People ask, do you want to give it a crack? And I was fortunate enough to work on Kevin Rudd's, our Prime Minister Kevin Rudd at the time, or he was running for election, and we give a protection detail to the leader of the opposition during an election period, and Kevin Rudd happened to win, and I was lucky enough to stay on. So I stayed on there and took over as team leader of that team shortly after. One of a couple of team leaders. We, as I said before, we run in different shifts and different teams. So I ran one of the teams that was responsible for that, which was very enjoyable.
So, like you see in the movies, guys jump in front of bullets for prime ministers and presidents and stuff. Did you ever have to jump in front of an egg?
No, I didn't. I wasn't around for any eggings. There's been a couple of incidents, nothing too major, and we're very lucky down here in Australia. We've got a good culture, a good community. It's it's not to say that nothing could happen, and there's been a couple of hiccups around the place, and we don't always go to nice countries, so every now and then you're called upon, but a lot of what your work is in preparation, and if you can do your preparation right, then you rarely have to do anything that upsets the apple cart when you're out and about. No world leader wants to be seen rushed off because of a security issue, so. Your job, you put a lot of work into the beforehand, so that you don't have to create an incident unless it's absolutely necessary.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be quite common for that area of the world, considering it's so out of the way. Because in New Zealand, Jacinda Fresno, I don't know what I
don't know why you're asking me.
She was talking about how she just goes to the shop and just wanders about as if she's not the Prime Minister, and that to me seems a bit insane considering.
But great at the same time.
Aye, but
for them.
But if you compare that to the US, where they had to get rid of some National Guard soldiers because they were part of white nationalist groups, and they were they were talking about killing Joe Biden and stuff like that. You're like, yeah, not every country in the world is the same.
Yeah, look, I think it's a different model, and for different reasons. The US have lost a couple of presidents, so I suppose they've got good reason. There've been a few attempts on a couple of presidents, so they've probably got good reason. And but the US model, and I'll just bastardize it or strip it back. in describing it. But the US model is largely, I mean, it's very much intelligence led, but it's largely based around creating a security bubble around the president and whoever they're looking after. And you know, I've done some work with the US Secret Service. I've done some work with the State Department, and you know, they've got teams of multiple hundreds of protection officers. You know, I think one of their teams had 950 or something, or they travel with 950 people, including you know, admin and all that sort of stuff. So it's a huge. You know, they just create the space, which makes it extremely difficult for anybody to get close if their intelligence doesn't happen to pay off. The British model, which is probably a little bit more similar to what we do down here, is a largely intelligence-led model, which allows the Prime Minister a little bit more scope to move around freely. And again, some of that intelligence is deep intelligence that you've studied for, you know, days, weeks, months and years maybe on certain areas and people. And some of it is situational awareness. You know, if you weren't expected to pop into the shops at, you know, 1 p.m. on a Tuesday, well, it's very unlikely that somebody is sitting in that shop waiting for something to happen, you know, so you can be a little bit more liberal with letting them walk around. And you know, part of the job is there's always a trade-off between security and protocol. And, you know, there's also, I suppose, again, the culture that we have in Australia, it's also somebody's life. And as in not protecting their life, but, you know, can you imagine if today you drive yourself to work and you drive yourself to the shops, and then all of a sudden within 24 hours, you've got 15 people standing around you telling you can't go here, you've got to go here, sit in this car. You know, that can be quite a bit of a shock to your life. So I think, you know, my view is if you're going to be a good protection officer, you have to accept and try and allow your dignitary to have their dignity and have a life as much as they can.
Mm-hmm. So if you'd humour me a wee bit. So a scenario for you. Say Scott Morrison agreed to come on this podcast, and he was going to come to the home studio to do it. What would be the protocol for allowing that to happen?
Yeah, look, I won't get into too much of specifics because even though I'm not there, I don't want to give away trade secrets that are probably well known, but it's not for me to give them away. But, you know, you guys would write to the Prime Minister's office. Look, primarily the Prime Minister's office will make a decision where they're going to go. They will consult security in case it's too dangerous. And on the very rare occasion, you know, security is able to cancel an event because of a security issue. But primarily, you know, his office will decide he's going to do it, and then security figure out how it's going to be done safely. And I dare say you'd be getting a knock on the door at least a few days before for people to come and have a look around. You'd probably have to submit to some sort of background checks. They'd probably be done anyway, whether you say yes or no. And then you'd be getting people turning up, you know, multiple hours early, you know, checking around. And again, depending on intelligence, if there's no reason to suspect anything's going to happen, you know, next door or around the place, or there's nobody in the area that's a problem, it's probably not going to be a huge impost on you. If Joe Biden was to come, your house would probably be shut down for about 3 months.
Yeah. That was the reason I asked, because Obama went on a podcast with a guy called Mark Martin, and he said that his house was basically on lockdown for weeks, and they had Secret Service there for ages, and he just didn't really get to live his life, and that was just so that Obama could go into his shed for an hour, and so that was what I asked.
And as I said, that's what I do. That model creates a bubble, and you know, pretty much from the time they get the booking, they want to control the area. It's not a right or a wrong thing. As I said, they've got good reason to be worried about their presidents, I suppose. But, you know, from the time they get the booking, they want to control the area so that any car that drives in, because, you know, anybody potentially is a threat. And the higher value target you're looking after, I suppose there's more things to worry about, and with modern technology, there's a lot of, somebody doesn't have to be standing right next to the person you're looking after to attack them these days. So, they could have planted something. If they know they're coming there 3 months' time, you can plan things with timers, and you can plan things that are remote control, and there's a whole range of different things. So it's I can understand it, but yes, it certainly would be a different a different kettle of fish. And there's some countries around the world that do that. Asian countries are very big at that as well, closing places down. I spent a bit of time in Asia and Asia Pacific, and I've been held up in a lot of traffic jams because presidents were driving around, and they'll stop traffic for an hour just because the president's going to drive past for 5 minutes. But that's it's a reality, and as I've said, sometimes it's not the fact that it's now Joe Biden, but it was Donald Trump or Barack Obama or Scott Morrison. It's not the fact that the person, the individual, I don't mean this in a bad way, but Joe Biden as Joe Biden doesn't particularly matter. Donald Trump as Donald Trump doesn't particularly matter. But as the president of the United States, it makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And often, again, probably back to that question about marijuana before, that sometimes people have to look after someone they don't like, and I was fortunate enough that the people I looked after I actually got on quite well with, and some still do. But it was very easy for me to say that my job was looking after the office of the Prime Minister. It wasn't looking after or through that time, Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard. We've had I didn't look after some of these, but Malcolm Turnbull, then Tony Abbott, then Malcolm Turnbull. It doesn't matter whether you like the person or not. The office is what's important, and if the office goes down, then the country's in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Can we? Okay, so if we switch up to, I wanted to go into sort of the next part of your story.
Sure.
On the bio here, it just says basically in late 2016, disaster struck. Could you take us through sort of what led to the disaster in 2016?
Yeah, absolutely. It took a turn for the worse in 2016, but it was probably building up since 2007, I suppose. Look, I think I mentioned at the top of the show, I ended up at the end of the day being diagnosed with a severe depressive disorder and a severe gambling addiction. And as I said before, I grew up in Western Sydney. Things like going for a punt on the horses and having a beer was all pretty normal. And I'd been gambling on horse races for years and years. Hadn't never been a problem. But gradually, from about 2007 was probably where I first noticed it was becoming, or it was a bit more of an issue. And I went into relapse. I'm just trying to think of the word. I quit and relapsed a couple of times in and out of there, and ultimately, the addiction, the gambling addiction, cost me a lot of money. It cost me nearly $2 million. But by the end of it, I was, I was using money that I didn't have, and some of that money, unfortunately, was from, I was looking after I used to run the commissioner's office, and I was responsible for, work credit cards and all that sort of stuff. And a portion of that money came from the work credit card, and it was 2016 where that showed up. And there's no, as I suppose a little bit joked before, I was the only person from Mount Druitt not to be in jail, and I very nearly became another statistic from there. But look, I think probably the real deeper story to that was that I was a successful guy. I was I had a nice family. I had a great job. I had a fantastic job that I loved. But something wasn't quite right inside me, and I was masking that for a long time. I was an alpha male. I played rugby league. I was a police officer. I was running the Prime Minister's protection team. I was running the Commissioner's office. And, as I say, I'm in just about finished or in the middle of writing a book. And I say in there, I wanted to be the guy that people went to solve problems. And because I was that guy, I didn't feel like I could go to somebody else with my own problems, because if I had a problem, then I didn't feel like I could be the problem solver anymore. And you know, we're in a egotistical alpha male dominated business where people with mental health issues, rightly or wrongly, I don't believe people intentionally treat people with mental health issues differently, but it does happen. And so that usually means that people's issues will go underground. To be honest, I probably masked it from myself as much as anybody else. It wasn't like I knew what the problem was and I just couldn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't want to have that problem. And so gradually over the course of, as I said, probably nearly 10 years, I would always, I would seemingly default to gambling as my coping mechanism. That was my escape. It didn't matter whether it was $1, $100, $1,000. It was my escape. It was the one place that I could turn my mind off. Years and years of being active. I was barely sleeping, 2-4 hours a night. When I was at work, I was on, but at the minute I left work, I would just, in a bit of a heap. I describe it as, imagine hugging your children, people that you love more than anything in this world, and not wanting to be anywhere in that hug. Yeah. And, it's a very awkward feeling for somebody that seemingly can solve any element of problem. Not only could I not solve the problem, I didn't even have a clue what the problem was. And, so I just kept making silly decisions after silly decisions in order to mask the problem, in order to escape the issue, in order to get away from it. And ultimately that caught up with me, and, I wasn't able to control it the way I should. And that meant the end of my career. It was blasted in the paper for a little bit. So it also meant the end, or what was the end at the time, of my reputation. Mm-hmm. I lost part of my family from it. So it was a pretty devastating time. We did get to that point, or I did get to that point of, I was fortunate enough that, I was considering the end, and, things like suicide, and then I took myself off to the doctor. That was too scary for me to go through. And over the last 3 years, I've been working very hard on understanding what got me there, and also got out the other side, and how I can help other people, get through those sorts of things, whether it's gambling addiction or, I even said to people, I think my depression was an addiction. It was something that was easy for me to hold on to, that, so it doesn't necessarily have to be substance. There's plenty of things that cause people to rot. But as I said, primarily I was a successful guy to everybody. Maybe in this Instagram world, I was the Instagrammable guy standing next to the Prime Minister and a Commissioner and Parliament House, and driving a decent car and nice house and family. And but inside, it was a mess.
Mm. The thing I like a lot about your story as well is that the part you're in now is basically full circle. You come back around to basically doing PE, which describes it in a small way. It's a lot bigger than that, but like.
That's true. Well, I also run a gym. I run a gym now too, so I've gone full circle, and I do the fitness stuff. But it was a very difficult time. It was soul crushing, because look, I'd lived my life, what I believe was with integrity, and I lived my life, as I've mentioned in this interview. I believe in serving the office of the Prime Minister, and I believe in serving, doing the right thing by the federal police and upholding the values and those sorts of things. And, I think the hardest thing to come to terms with was that I let that down. Even that was even harder to come to terms with than letting myself down, and maybe even letting my family down, was that, I really believed in, and I believe in the institution that I was in, and, my actions and my inability to speak up and to be vulnerable at that time, cost me, my standing in that place.
Mm-hmm. So, just sort of going through your website right now as well, you do a lot of one-on-one coaching, all that kind of stuff, and you do a bit of motivational speaking, a bit of public speaking as well. Have you been doing it? So, how long have you been doing this, like, altogether? When did you start Strong Mend?
Yeah, so Strong Mend, I started Strong Mend as a business in August last year, but probably for a year or so before that, I'd been doing that type of work. What I noticed, as I said, I was running a gym, and quite often you get people in that are struggling with their weight, and my basic premise for a lot of my coaching is that my gambling was a symptom. It was definitely a problem. I don't hide from the fact that I had a problem with gambling. But it was a symptom to something that was far deeper. And, I'd been to Gamblers Anonymous places, and I'd been to places that tried to address my gambling without addressing the underlying issues. And what I started finding with some of the people I was coaching at the gym was that they had the same underlying issues that I had. It's just that their drug of choice was food or laziness or, sitting on the couch or gaming. Often depression as well, and so I started coaching a little deeper, and then I've had a chance. I haven't done a lot of speaking at the moment, but I've had a chance to talk at a couple of smaller places, and I started the web page or Facebook page where I try and do a lot of posting around my own journey because I think that the hardest thing, and again, a lot of my focus is around alpha males, successful males that are having that same struggle that I had. That is that they know something's wrong, but they don't know what it is and know even less what to do about it. I think one of the dramas is that as a strong man, as an alpha male, as a CEO of a company, as a police officer, you have lived your whole life identifying as the person that has no faults or no problems, that solves other people's problems, and therefore you end up in this state where you can't, it's not right, but you just can't figure out what on earth to do. So I try and help guys, as I said, like me, before they get to where I got to.
Awesome.
So you mentioned, sorry, I've got a horrible thing stuck in my throat, so I keep coughing. Apologies. You were talking about the hardships of some of the things like gambling and stuff like that, and then you opened the gym in 2020. That seems like it would have its own host of issues.
The gym. I started at the gym in 2017.
Oh right, okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, and then Strong Mend came on the back of that, where I was starting to coach people more personally rather than fitness.
Right.
And probably the premise for Strong Mend, that coaching, that personal coaching business or work that I'm trying to do, and the talking that I'm trying to do, and the message I'm trying to share is, I went through some shit in my life, and it was fucking hard, and it was all my own doing. Everyone, there's a lot of people talking about, it's very easy to blame something else. I would work 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. I was on call 24/7. I did 54 trips away from my family in a year. There's a whole bunch of those reasons. But ultimately, we are all in control of our own decisions, as hard as it might be on some occasions and as hard as it might be to accept. And the whole premise for why I wanted to start working with other guys that might have been in similar situations to me was that I went through that pain. I put myself through that pain, and I believe that if I don't do something with it, it will be for nothing. And, I've been fortunate enough to work with a couple of guys that, have been struggling. And it's for a guy that can't speak up or has been socially conditioned that it's not safe to speak up because you lose your manhood. It doesn't become a very it's a very steep slope before you get into some real serious trouble. And I'm not talking about my gambling trouble of losing money, but I was I said to the psychologist when I went, I was very annoyed with myself that I didn't go 6 months earlier. but I was very fucking happy I didn't go 6 months later, because I don't think I would have made it. It's something that can hit men, and we know, men are 3 times more likely to commit suicide, especially in my age bracket, because we don't know what the problem is. We don't know how to speak up, and, we're not comfortable to speak up. And I understand that. And I, as I said, I would have felt like my pain was for nothing if I didn't start, using it to help other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go. I want to, in fact, we should say, it says here you have a book coming out as well, due March. Is that still happening?
Yeah. I'm hoping to be out the end of March. Externally bulletproof, internally brittle. It's a little bit of play on what a bit of my career, I suppose, as well. But again, the alpha male, the CEO, the police officer, the military guy. We're built to be externally bulletproof, that nothing can hurt us. But sometimes inside we're not. We crumble a little bit. And basically, it's a bit of a story about my journey. It's a little bit warts and all. It tells about the depths that I got into with gambling and what it felt like. But it also journals my pathway out and a system that I use in my coaching that seems quite successful. So hopefully the end of March, depending on how quick publishers and stuff are, but end of March, early April, I'd say.
Awesome, man. Awesome.
Is the book already written?
Is it already written?
Yeah.
It's already written in the sense of it's all written down on paper. It needs to, with editors and move around and put this here and change that to there. But this is my first throw at it, so I don't know how long those sorts of things take. And I tend to rewrite bits over and over again, so someone's got to take it off me so that I stop.
Awesome, man. Well, Gary, thank you for coming on. It's been much appreciated, man.
Thank you, gents. I appreciate you reaching out and giving me an opportunity to have a chat to you and speak about my career. I don't speak about my career, the police part of it, too much, and it's quite enjoyable. As I said, I didn't necessarily leave in the best of ways, but it certainly was. There's a lot of fun memories for me, so I appreciate you guys having me on. And as I said, I've enjoyed listening to some of your other material as well, and I'll be a listener from now on as well.
Awesome, thank you, man. Well, if you add us on Facebook, man, we'll try and hook someone up with you, man. I would suggest as well for you to do your own podcast as well. You've got an interesting story.
Definitely.
It'd be great for you to speak to other people as well.
Funny you should mention that, mate. 2 days ago, I just made an announcement that
yes.
First Tuesday in February, I'm doing a podcast.
Amazing, man. But we will happily come on if you have any interesting stuff for us.
Fantastic. I'll definitely get you on for some for a little bit of light relief.
Excellent, man. Excellent. No problem at all, man. Well, again, thanks again, and I look forward to hearing more from your podcast, man.
Appreciate it, boys. Thank you very much for having me on.
Excellent, man.